Vvardenfell is an unforgiving land, full of blight and disease, monsters both physical and political. It's certainly not a place you'd enjoy the thought of living in unless you were one of the privileged few, read Dark Elves from the major houses or high-ranking Imperial agents, afforded the luxuries, power, and relative safety that would come with said privilege. So would you live in Vvardenfell if Morrowind, or, well, the version of Vvardenfell shown in Morrowind, was real? No, absolutely not. But if you were forced to live there, what settlement should you choose as your new home? This is the question I'm going to try to answer by ranking all the cities, towns, and villages of Vvardenfell from the Elder Scrolls Morrowind based on how livable they are for a regular human. Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer, and I make guides and discussion videos about games I like, in particular RPGs. This is my first Morrowind video, out of hopefully many, and it is dedicated to my partner. Morrowind is my partner's favorite game. She has tattoos with Moon and Star, Vivek, Almalexia, and Sotha Sil, a quote from a book in Morrowind, plus a couple of Daedric princes. So yes, I've been meaning to make a Morrowind video for a while now. Here's how I'm going to do this ranking. There are a few requirements that settlements in Vvardenfell need to fulfill in order to be considered viable. 1. There should be access to food and drink by virtue of a merchant. Anyone who sells edible alchemy ingredients and alcoholic beverages works for this purpose, since you can't exactly buy proper food and water in the game. I will assume that a settlement without a trader offering food or drinks has its denizens foraging for food and sourcing and cleaning their own water, which I don't think is exactly wise for a non-Tamriel person. Ideally, there would be a tavern or inn, but a trader with food and drink will work in a pinch. Any additional amenities such as sources of entertainment like bookshops and taverns, clothing, and household items are highly appreciated and will garner a much higher score than a settlement that only has food and water, but they aren't strictly necessary. 2. There should be at least one form of official public transportation method to reach the settlement, aka Siltstrider or boat. If there's no such transportation in-game, I will assume that there's a reason for it, such as the waters being too treacherous to cross, or the wilderness being too dangerous for a regular caravan or Siltstrider transport. Of course, there must be some trade and transportation happening between these smaller settlements and the rest of Vvardenfell. I don't imagine they're completely self-sufficient, but for the purpose of this video, I don't consider any headcanon-y ideas like that to be true, and thus those unreachable settlements are disqualified. And 3. The settlement can't be located in a very dangerous area or otherwise be mostly inhabited by a faction that wouldn't accept outsiders readily. For the first reason, anything located within the Ashlands or Molag Amur is out. For the second reason, Ashlander camps, house strongholds, and Imperial forts are out, though Ashlander camps are also in dangerous areas, so they're double out. The house strongholds are very obviously not going to accept some random non-Dunmer there, except maybe as slaves or lowly servants, so you don't want to be there anyway. Plus, all 3 strongholds could also simply not exist, since maybe the Nerevarine hasn't cared to build a stronghold or hasn't gotten around to it yet. You could potentially join the Imperial Legion if you're able-bodied enough, or maybe the Imperial Cult, and be assigned to one of the forts, but it's not a sure thing, and I prefer to work with clear and hard facts as much as possible. I know we're talking about a fictional world in a video game here, but, you know, clear and hard facts within the limitations of the medium. Finally, I'm also not taking into account any of the DLC areas, since I usually don't play the DLCs and they're not on the Vvardenfell landmass anyway. Based on these rules, the disqualified settlements are all the Ashlander camps, house strongholds, and Imperial forts, as previously mentioned, Aldrune, Ghostgate, and Margan due to being in a too dangerous area, Caldera, Pelagiad, Aldvelothi, and Telfir due to not being reachable by Siltstrider or boat. Due to the lack of drinks, and in some cases only having one potential but dubious source of food, Hlaoad, Kul, and Telvos are also disqualified. Telvos is a wizard tower that is reachable by foot from the village of Voss, so technically speaking you could get drinks from Voss, but I didn't want to make an exception because frankly Telvos doesn't have much going for it anyway, so it stays disqualified. Before we get into the rankings, I'll take a moment to say a special thank you to my members who help keep this channel running. I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider joining as a member to support me and unlock perks like early access to videos. Joining is very much appreciated, but not required. I am always thankful even if you just take the time to like the video and maybe leave a comment. Back to the video, starting the ranking with the cities. Balmora is the nominal district seat of House Hlalu, so slavery is rampant, but it's like that pretty much everywhere outside of imperial settlements. It's also the second largest settlement geographically speaking after Vivec. It's a bit too close for my liking to the Ashlands, though it's fairly well defended by guards, the fighters and mages guilds, plus the imperial soldiers from the nearby Moonmoth Legion fort. So in terms of safety, I'd say it's pretty solid. The Silt Strider travels to Aldrun, Seydanin, Suran, and Vivec. Seeing as it's connected to Vivec, it probably gets a lot of travelers and goods coming through, which is a good thing for the city's economy, and for your personal needs and entertainment. The Odai River runs through Balmora and divides it into 4 districts: Hightown, the Commercial District, Labor Town, plus the Moonmoth Legion Fort, which I technically consider to be on the outskirts of the town rather than part of it, but whatever. Hightown is home to the fancy Hlalu Manors, a fine clothier, a well-stocked alchemist, and the Morak Tong Guild Hall. You probably don't want to go here a lot other than to visit the clothier or the alchemist due to the possibility of being kidnapped and turned into a slave, but it is nice to have a fancy part of town because that means there will be fairly frequent shipments of goods with pretty decent quality too, if you have the money for that kind of stuff, of course. The commercial district has many different merchants, including a bookseller and an outfitter, which are must-haves in my opinion. The Silt Strider port is along the south wall, across from the Council Club and Kamona Tong, both of which I'd give a miss, and the Tavern Locky Luckup. The tavern is nice. The Fighters Guild and Mages Guild are next to each other, so if you have any issues that require their services, they're very close. There's also the 8 Plates Inn, competing with the Lucky Lockup in terms of places you'd want to go grab a bite and drink, as well as very likely where you'd stay in the beginning by renting one of their beds. In terms of merchants, Claudius Clandler is the outfitter who has clothes, ingredients, drinks, various household items, and even a book for sale. Dorisa Darvel is the bookseller and she has a huge amount of books for sale, which is very much appreciated. The pawnbroker Dralasa Nithrion may also be of interest since she stocks some drinks, clothes, books, and miscellaneous items, though I'd stay away from consumables since she does operate a pawn shop and the quality of those isn't great. Like, she actually has spoiled potions of cure disease and slowfall. I'm definitely not touching any of the drinks she sells. Ravir has a few non-combat related items too, such as common clothes, paper, a random ingredient, and various household items. You could also visit Thoric at the Razor Hole for weapons and Meldor for armor if you think you can handle fighting in Vvardenfell. You probably can't. Or you could also convince them to hire you on as a blacksmith apprentice, which would be a pretty swanky job. East of the river, Labor Town has many modest residences and Labor Street runs through it. I'd imagine that you'd be able to rent a room or perhaps even a home eventually in this area. It's not the most amazing looking district, but it's fine and more importantly seems affordable. The South Wall Corner Club is the local hideout of the Thieves Guild, so I'd recommend avoiding it unless you want to get involved with that, even just by accidentally being there when some kind of illicit business is taking place. Finally, there's also a tribunal temple on the hill near Hightown which offers various services such as healing. You could potentially join the temple since you'd be allowed to sleep in a temple bed for free, which is very convenient since you likely wouldn't have any money in the beginning unless some of your accessories like a phone or a watch would be turned into Dwemer artifacts upon entering the game world. I imagine staying as a novice member is fine, just try to get some donations from people in the city and help out in the temple and you don't just get a bed but also free blessings. Before analyzing Balmora from the perspective of a potential citizen, I'll admit I didn't think that much of it. I thought that it was overrated due to the fact that it's likely the first city you visit at the start of the game, but it actually has a lot going for it. Plenty of protection, lots of merchants, a tavern and an inn with beds to sleep in, a temple, quite a lot of potential jobs, and even proper but affordable residences to rent or purchase at some point. I'll give Balmora an 8 out of 10. While it's well protected, I still feel a bit uneasy since it's a bit too close to the Ashlands, and being farther from the coast also means that shipments of goods, especially foodstuffs, are a bit slower than in places like Ebonheart, Vivec, and so on. More perishable foods would likely not even make it super far inland if they're already being brought from another continent, and I really don't know whether I could stomach some of the more local food ingredients, what with my being somewhat of a picky eater. But nonetheless, we're starting off strong with Balmora as a very good option. Moving on, Sadrith Mora is beautiful. I love Telvanni architecture, but having it also means there's Telvanni there, so that kind of cancels itself out. It's very far from Red Mountain, so that makes it quite safe. It's picturesque both due to the architecture as well as the fact that you're in the middle of a bunch of small islands. Lots of fishing can be done, and I'd say it's probably the most peaceful of all cities, though I'm not sure how peaceful and friendly it is to non-Dunmer. My partner also raised an interesting point, which is that due to all those mushroom towers, there may be a particular wet mushroom smell when it rains. If you like it, good for you, but I'll assume that most people would find it unpleasant. You can travel by boat to Vvardenfell, Ebonheart, Tel Branora, and Tel Mora. Ebonheart is the most important of these destinations since it receives frequent shipments from the mainland as well as other regions, so Sadrith Mora is fairly well stocked. The city is built in typical Telvanni style with great magically formed mushrooms springing from the ground, each being expanded to suit the needs of the inhabitant. They're grown in a gigantic loop around the Tower of Tel Naga, which is the home of Master Neloth, who is a nasty piece of work, so stay as far away from him as possible. The city offers a Moraktong base, an inn, and a restaurant. North of the Great Market is the Telvanni Council Hall, a large orb surrounded by giant mushroom stalks. Along the northern edge of the city, there's also a slave market, so stay away from there unless you want to possibly get snatched up. Visitors aren't really supposed to travel beyond the Gateway Inn into the city, as it's the official hostel for outsider visitors. In order to be allowed to walk around Sadrith Mora, you need to have hospitality papers from the Prefect of Hospitality and Garrod Hell at the Gateway Inn. That's more of a money-making scam than anything, but I would expect that the Telvanni there might force you to go through the process of getting the papers anyway. However, the one place where foreigners are welcome is at the nearby Imperial Fort, Wolverine Hall. But I've said I'm not counting the forts as places to stay for a regular person, so unfortunately that's only going to be a nice place to visit. On the main street, there's stalls with various wares provided by independent traders. You can buy food and drinks from Pierlet Rostorad, Threvul Serethi, or Anis Seloth. The Gateway Inn is the place where you'd likely be most welcome to stay, and food, drinks, and beds are available at Eri, the Red Guard publican who runs the inn. Ankola is a trader who has some clothing and household items for sale. You may be able to try to get a job as an apprentice to the smith Anruin. If you're allowed further in the city, there's also Farah's Hole in the Wall, a tavern near the Telvanni Council House. Farah, the Wood Elf publican, provides food, drinks, and beds to all visitors. Outside Farah's Hole in the Wall, there's also the alchemist Arangair, who may have some food items among her many alchemical ingredients and potions. Elegal is a wood elf trader who owns a stall near the slave pods under the large spiraling branch and sells various clothes, food ingredients, and household items. I'd recommend staying away from the pawnbroker Meder Nulen because he works for the Kamana Tong and is in their hideout in Nevrila Araloth's house. He has a variety of goods for sale like food, clothing, and household items, but I doubt that he'd sell anything to an outlander. You'd just be putting yourself at risk by going there. If you can make it into the Telvanni Council House, you could also buy some scrib jerky from Tendris Vedran, an apothecary who's standing entry to the Telvanni Council House. Or books from Niras Faris, a priest of the Tribunal Temple. The temple hasn't been given much space or furnishings in here, so if you were hoping to join the Tribunal Temple to get access to a place to sleep and such, you're better off doing that somewhere else where the temple is actually respected, like Balmora or Vivek. All in all, despite the good way the city looks, I get the sense you really wouldn't be welcome here, and it might be very difficult to get started here. It is potentially a good place to move to later on once you've figured things out and have grown your reputation as a laborer, craftsman, or merchant, or what have you. But as it stands, I'll give Sadrith Mora a 5 out of 10. It has all the basic necessities and it's safe from Red Mountain, and generally well protected from wildlife or monsters considering there's also the Imperial Fort nearby, but otherwise it's a bit too hostile towards outlanders for me to recommend it. Vivek is the worst. I hate this city with a passion. I always get lost whenever I go there, and it's the main reason why I never finished the main quest. Everything is confusing, it takes ages to get everywhere, hello hundreds of stairs and huge inclines, and it's ugly as hell. Plus, Vivek is there. You really want to live in the same city as a crazy demigod? But I will try to be somewhat objective and give a less biased score. Vivek is split into 10 districts called cantons. I won't go through all of them because that would make the video over an hour long, so I'll just focus on the one canton that you're actually likely to live in. And if we're just talking about living in one canton, that's actually not so bad. The Foreign Quarter was originally the only canton in which foreign visitors to Vivec were allowed. Even now, Outlanders are far better treated here than anywhere else in Vivec, so it's more likely where you'd want to stay. Unless you're a member of the Tribunal Temple, you'd be able to get affordable housing in St. Dylan's Canton, or a deserving merchant, whatever that may mean, in which case you could get housing and a shop space in St. Olm's Canton. Back to the Foreign Quarter. The plaza level has the imperial services, including the mages and fighters guilds. There's also Kretia Julalian, an imperial alchemist part of the mages guild who sells some food and drinks to everyone. In the lower wasteworks, you can find the Black Shalk Corner Club, a tavern that provides food, drinks, and beds through its proprietor, Rariel Giral. Other shops you can find in the lower wasteworks are Aurane Frernius' Apothecary, where you can get some food, drinks, even sloth soap. Andilu Drothan is an alchemist who sells various alchemy ingredients, some edible, some like sloth soap, as well as drinks, including skooma. There's also Jobasha's Rare Books, a bookshop owned by the eponymous Jobasha. You can find a ton of books here, including some rare ones. This seems like the best bookshop in Vvardenfell, well-stocked and probably getting a lot of new books often. Sevini Sarion is a dark elf savant who has a small selection of books for sale. You're far more likely to find something interesting at Jobasha, but who knows, maybe her stock is cheaper and thus more affordable early on, especially the Guide to Vivec, which may be of use. Finally, Mune Guy is an Argonian enchanter who does have some household items for sale, not just magic-related things. In the upper wasteworks, you can find Baisa, who sells various goods including household items and articles of clothing. Nothing special, but I'd imagine these are more affordable to start than goods from fancier merchants. There's also Rolasa Oren, an alchemist who sells various ingredients, not sure how edible or useful, as well as a good skooma pipe if you feel like getting into the habit. Finally, in the canal works, you can find Agrippina Herenia, a clothier who has a large variety of clothes available for sale. Jean is a Redguard trader who sells all sorts of things, including clothes, drinks, and many household items. Jurasha is a Khajiit healer who sells food ingredients. In particular, there's restocking ash yams, small kwama eggs, salt rice, chokeweed, and marshmallow, cheap potions, and maste. Finally, Simin Fralini is a Breton bookseller who has a good selection of books for sale, though not as many as Jabasha, of course. There's lots of services and goods available in the Foreign Quarter, and provided you find a place to stay, either at the Black Shalk Quarter Club or by renting a room or small home somewhere else in the canton, you'd probably have a good time here. So I take back what I said about Vivec being a bad place to live, but only if we're just talking about living and moving around one canton. I still maintain that the city overall is badly designed for people who can't levitate or teleport, and that's that. Seeing as you may also be able to move and live in St. Olm's or St. Dylan if you become a merchant or a Tribunal Temple member, respectively, I'll also mention some of the goods and services available in those cantons. In St. Olm's you can find two clothiers, Mevure Chlen and Nalvilie Saren, traders who have a few household items, Bervin Laren and Nalis Gals, and a couple of traders who can offer you food and drinks, Moroni Uvelas and Vaval Selas. There's no bookstore here, so I think the Foreign Quarter is a better place to live, though you may enjoy peddling your wares as a merchant in St. Olm's. In St. Dylan, you can find merchants selling household goods, Alarvin Indalas, Rathal Barus, Gomeso Sarano, Lucretianos Olchinius, who also has one random clothing item, and possibly Dolen Rolls, though in-game he doesn't have anything for sale, but trades in miscellaneous items. Tervur Braven has some items of clothing, maste, ashyams, and household items. The best stocked trader is Mevel Ferrerus, who has a few clothes, some random food ingredients, a few books, as well as many household items. St. Dylan's is lacking a bit in food, though maybe if you're a member of the temple you could go to the abbey and eat there with the others. But otherwise I think it's a nicer place to live than St. Olm's, so if you think you're better off joining the Tribunal Temple than finding work somewhere else, St. Dylan's is more than livable. Overall, I'll give Vivec, in particular the Foreign Quarter, a score of 9 out of 10. It has a great variety of goods and services, it's near all the other cantons, so you may be able to find more opportunities and stuff by traveling to them. The only reason I'm not giving it a 10 is because aesthetically it's quite unpleasant to look at, And I will also say that being so large and full of trade and money means that crime is more likely. So I can't imagine it's the safest place to be, especially for an outlander, even if you're just sticking to the foreign quarter. Moving on to the towns. These are quite a bit smaller than the cities, so it'll be faster to go through and score them. Ebonheart is an imperial town. Actually, it's the seat of imperial authority in Vvardenfell. It's also super close to Vivec, so you could very easily travel to any of the cantons, but most likely the foreign quarter. There's also travel by boat to Hlaoad, Sadrith Mora, and Tel Branora. It's very far from Red Mountain and it's protected by imperial guards, so personally I'd feel a lot safer here than in Vivec. It's got a lot of shipments coming through since the East Empire Company is chartered directly by the Emperor, so it has its offices, warehouses, and docks adjacent to the castle. The Six Fishes is the inn at the gates to the castle Ebonheart. The owner, Agning, offers food and drink as well as beds, though in terms of food he's really just got bread and a random ingredient. Yulus Truptor is a member of the imperial cult who is responsible for the Almoner missions, and he also sells a few books, though his prices may be a bit high. Lalatia Varian is an imperial priestess serving as oracle in the imperial cult, and she also has an amazing thing for sale: 1 bread. She has some potions as well, but most likely you won't need those. Finally, Landarum, a high elf trader, has a few clothes and household items for sale. Unfortunately, there's not super many well-stocked merchants in Ebonheart, which is fairly disappointing considering the fact that this is a town constantly receiving and sending shipments. Thankfully, Vivec is nearby, so you can get anything you weren't able to obtain in Ebonheart there. I'm giving Ebonheart a 7 out of 10. While I like it more than Vivec both aesthetically and due to being protected by Imperial guards, the fact that it doesn't really have books and has very few clothes, food, and other items for sale really brings it down. It is useful to be super close to the edge of Vvardenfell so that if something cataclysmic were to happen, you could make a quick getaway by ship, though Vivec is almost as close, so you could probably go to Ebonheart from there and still manage to get out in time. Gnisis is the largest town in the northwest, nicely far away from Red Mountain, but also a bit too far from other proper civilization. The closest two things you've got are 2 small villages, Alt Velothi and Kul. If this would have been a large city like Sadrith Mora, it wouldn't be as much of a problem since it would have the amount of things necessary for a nice, fulfilling life on its own, but since it's just a town, I'm not impressed. It's under a large egg mine, so at least you know you shouldn't be running out of a nutritious source of food anytime soon, unless the Kwama get diseased or blighted. You can travel by Siltstrider to Aldrun, Kul, Margan, and Sedanin. Side note, I don't think I could stomach to travel by Siltstrider, so I'd stay put in whatever settlement I'm teleported to, unless it has boat travel available. Fenas Madak owns the Madak Trade House, a tavern in Gnisis, and has food and household items for sale. Interestingly enough, he doesn't sell drinks, but I assume that's an oversight since he literally owns a tavern. You can buy food from Chaplain Ogrul, an orc healer serving the Imperial cult. Mera Drora is a Dunmer priestess who also has a few food items for sale, as well as paper if you need it. Ulumfa Gra Sharob also has hound meat and small Kwama eggs for sale, among other potions, being an orc healer in Fort Darius. Shulki Ashun Babi is a Dunmer trader who has food and household items for sale at his stall outside the temple. Zeba Benamamat is a Dunmer clothier, also located outside the temple, and he has a small selection of clothes for sale, obviously. Inside the temple, Zanmulk Samalamus is a Dunmer healer who sells food, potions, and flin, so there's your drink sorted. Hetman Abelmawia Eribel is a dark elf commoner representing the Velothi Dunmer, being a steward for Hlaren Ramaran of House Redoran. He is responsible for security relating to the Gnisis egg mine, so you may need to purchase a pass from him in order to be allowed legal entrance. Probably not necessary if you're going to get hired to work in the egg mine though. Abelmawia is also in charge of collecting taxes from the village. Busy man, this one. He also sells paper and a book, Ancestors and a Dunmer. All in all, Gnisis is a pretty mediocre place to live, with not much in terms of entertainment other than the local tavern and that one guy who has 1 book for sale. 3 out of 10, I'd rather take my chances in Sadrith Mora. Molag Mar is like a mini Vivec, and for that I'm giving it the stink eye because it's ugly. But since it's just like 1 canton, it's very likely to score high just like the foreign quarter of Vivec did, as long as it has a nice amount of goods and services. It is fairly close to the Molag Amur region, though not as much as a town like Suran is, so it's okay. Molag Mar is situated where it is due to the proximity to Mount Kand and Mount Asatni Bibi, and serves mainly as a home base for Tribunal Temple pilgrims on their way to these two landmarks. However, just because it's a pilgrim base doesn't mean it's not a good place to live. In terms of travel options, there's Vivek, Khla Oad, and Tel Brenora by boat, and Suran and Vivek by Siltstrider. The top of Molag Mar is open to the air and features a full temple, St. Veloth's hostel with beds and sundries, a house Redoran stronghold, and a few shops. You can buy food and drinks at the temple from Bervas Othenim, a Dunmer apothecary. If you're a member of the Tribunal Temple, you could also sleep there and eat with the others. Orns Omaren owns St. Veloth's hostel, where he offers a small selection of food and beds. Mandur Omalen is a trader at the Redoran stronghold who has clothes, food, a few books, and a few household items for sale. In the Molag Mar Wasteworks, you can find the Armiger's stronghold, which I recommend you stay away from, don't want to get on their bad side, and the Pilgrim's Rest Tavern. Selkir Nemus runs the tavern and has a very limited supply of food for sale, 2 types of cheap food ingredients. Also in the Wasteworks is Vasesius Vichulus, an imperial trader who sells all sorts of goods including clothes, food, drinks, books, and household items. The Wasteworks are fairly deserted in-game, and the reason isn't explained at all, so I'll just assume that not that many merchants consider Molag Mar to be a good place to peddle their wares due to a likely dwindling amount of pilgrims who are brave enough to travel through the Molag Amur region. Still, Molag Mar is a pretty good place to live with decent goods for sale, 2 taverns, the Tribunal Temple, a Redoran stronghold, and the Armigers for some potential extra security against monsters, and travel by both Siltstrider and boat. I'll give it a 7 out of 10, though I prefer it over Ebonheart since it has more goods and services. Suran, oh Suran. No, I'm not giving this one a high score just because of the ladies at Decella's House of Earthly Delights. I think the experience would get old really fast, and frankly, it's just not that interesting. Suran is a Hlalu town, complete with a watchtower and a small temple, similar to Balmora but of course smaller. It serves as the northern headquarters for Hlalu slavers doing business with nearby plantations, and also functions as a stopover for pilgrims and adventurers heading northeast into the Molag Amur region and Mount Kand. It's a bit too close for my liking to the Molag Amur region, literally bordering it. Add the Hlalu slavers on top of that, and yeah, no, I don't think I'd feel very comfortable in this town. Suran does have a decent amount of merchants though. Ashumanu Eraishach has food and drinks for sale at the trade house. Helviane Desele runs the Gentleman's Club previously mentioned. Ibarnadad Asir Narari is a Dunmer apothecary who sells various foods, drinks, and potions. Elinu Saren is a Dunmer priestess who works at the Tribunal Temple and sells food and books. There are 2 pawnbrokers. Golden Belaram sells clothes, food, and household items, and Ravoso Arion sells clothes, food, and drinks. Rald's Oriel is a trader selling clothes, food, a few books, and a good selection of household items. Ranosa Gilvain is a spellsword who has set up shop in Suran. She mainly sells weapons and armor, but she does have some clothing and drinks for sale as well. Finally, there's a specialized clothier, Verara Rendo, who sells a lot more clothes than the others, and of course I will assume her clothes are actually new, as opposed to the kind of clothes you're likely to buy from a pawnbroker or other less specialized traders. All in all, Suran is a decent place, if a bit on the dangerous side due to its position and focus on slavery. I'm also not entirely sure where you'd stay here, since other than Decella's House of Earthly Delights, there doesn't seem to be a proper inn or tavern offering beds. The only option I see is to join the Tribunal Temple, and if you're going to do that, then Vivek is a way better option, as you could even get a proper affordable home in St. Dellen's Canton. I'll give Suran a score of 5 out of 10. It's livable for sure, but I can't say it's a good place to live. Tel Arun is not so much a town as it is a small community built around the home of the Telvanni Archmagister, Lord Gothran. It's located on the small island in Zafirbel Bay to the west of Sadrith Mora, so it's nice and far from the problematic ashy center of Vvardenfell. It has the usual Telvanni architectural style, which is beautiful but possibly stinky when it rains. It has travel by boat to Dagon Fell, Telmora, and Voss. It's really weird it doesn't have boat travel to Sadrith Mora, which is like right there to the east, but whatever. you can go to Tel Mora and from there get to Sadrith Mora. The Plot and Plaster is a good tavern, though the owner Drarain Girith is having bad dreams. Hopefully, in the version of Vvardenfell would be teleported to, Dagoth Fovan is dead, so that Drarain doesn't have to deal with those dreams and Dagoth Ur's influence. You can get a decent amount of food and plenty of drinks at the tavern. There is a slave market, as with most of the larger Telvanni settlements, so do try to stay away from the slavers as much as possible. Bildren Araleth is a Dunmer apothecary who sells food and drinks. Bararaini Saris is a Dunmer alchemist who also sells food and drinks. And Irna Marion is a Dunmer apothecary who has some food for sale, though she seems to focus more on less edible alchemical ingredients and potions. Ferele Athram is a Dunmer trader who has a few clothes, books, and household items for sale. Finally, someone who has more than food and drinks, and a decent selection at that. Marin Uvaren is a Dunmer enchantress who sells a random piece of expensive clothing, a handful of books, and a few household items. Obviously, she focuses on enchanted items and magic scrolls, but she still has a few good things for sale for regular people. I will give Telarun a 5 out of 10, similar to Suran. While it's in a safer location and has a bunch of decent merchants, there's a slave market and the Tower of the Archmagister. Plus, it's protected by Telvanni-aligned guards, so I'm not expecting them to exactly jump to help a non-Dunmer. At least if there had been a temple, there could be a safer place to stay, but as it is, it just doesn't feel very welcoming to Outlanders. Tel Brenora is on an island far to the southeast, so nicely out of the way of monsters and ash storms. Similarly to Telarun, it's more so a tiny community around a wizard tower, this time the Tower of Mistress Thorana, who is the most eccentric of the Telvanni magelords. It's in the Telvanni architectural style, so pretty but potentially stinky. However, this one doesn't have a slave market, so that's a plus. It's accessible by boat and is connected to Ebonheart, Molagmar, Sadrith Mora, and Vivec, so that's nice since you can travel to one of the larger towns or to Vivec if you have some specific items you're looking to buy or just want more options for entertainment. There's not much near the docks other than a few hovels, which I hope that's not where you'd end up living. Most of the community is up at or near the tower. Fadasse Sylvain is a great merchant who has books, clothes, a bit of food and drinks, and a good selection of household items. There's also Lorena Sethan, who runs Sethan's Trade House, who sells food, drinks, and offers beds for rent. Not a huge amount of goods for sale, but decent considering this is a town and not a city, and it has boat travel to Vivec and Molagmar, which are well stocked. I'd consider Tel Brenora to be a bit better than Telarun due to the fact that Mistress Thorana is known for her eccentricities and is thus more likely to be left alone. Plus, she is in fact even higher level than the Archmagister, so that provides an extra reason for people not to challenge her. Though I would recommend you stay away from her, lest you provoke her wrath by accident. Tel Brenora gets a 6 out of 10. It's not one of my favorite places, but it's pretty to look at and it's quite nicely situated for both safety and trade purposes. Finally, Tel Mora is in the northeast and is once again a small community in and around a wizard tower. However, you can only stay here if you're a woman. I don't make the rules, Mistress Dratha does. She's one of the oldest Telvanni magelords and she hates men. Despite her old age, she's managed to stay sane, unlike Mistress Thorana. If you are a woman, you'll likely have a pretty nice time here in Tel Mora. Unless you're straight, I guess. Tough luck. Just like the other Telvanni settlements, it's got the pretty mushroom buildings. It has boat travel to Vvardenfell, Sadrith Mora, Tel Arun, and Voss. Not the most appealing options to travel to, but decent. No slave market here either, which is also a plus. The community has a good range of services of fairly high standard. Elignan, for example, is known for her exquisite work, and indeed she sells all manner of clothes, including expensive, extravagant, and exquisite ones. Berwen sells books, clothes, food, and drinks, as well as miscellaneous household items. You can also get food and drinks from Dainali Dren or Yolda. The Covenant is the tavern with the coolest name in Vvardenfell, owned by Theral, who offers food, drinks, and of course beds for renting. Since I'm a guy, I unfortunately wouldn't be accepted in Tel Mora, but I'll give it a score based on if you would be allowed to live there, and say it's a solid 8 out of 10. It sounds nice and peaceful, far enough from Red Mountain, and also far from most men's bullshit. Next up, villages. If I was already picky with the towns, I'll have even lower scores for most of the villages, since usually they're tiny, they don't have a lot going on in terms of goods and services, and they suck. Vvardenfell is super far north on the island of Sheogorad, far away from the dangers of Red Mountain and Molagamur. It's home to Nord fishermen as well as a detachment of Imperial Legion guards, so that means it's pretty well protected. It has boat travel options to Kul, Sadrith-Mora, Tel Arun, and Telmora. Not the best direct travel destinations for trade or entertainment, but considering its location, it is what it is. Heifnir is the best merchant since he has food, clothes, books, and a good amount of household items. Honestly, quite surprising considering the fact that this is a village. Hjotra the Peacock is a Nord pawnbroker who runs the renter rooms at the end of the world, a trade house with a very cool name. She has a variety of goods for sale, including the beautiful Colovian fur helm, common clothes, food and drinks, and household items. Frifnhild is a Nord trader who runs the tavern at the end of the world. She sells some random clothing, food, and a few household items. The worst part about this place is that it's very close to a Dwemer tower inhabited by a necromancer and his followers, which is quite concerning. If the necromancer is no longer an issue in this version of Vvardenfell we're teleported to, then it's good. But I'd recommend skipping this one if the necromancer is still there. Without the necromancer, I'll give Vvardenfell a 6 out of 10. Honestly, better than some of the towns I've scored so far, and seeing as it's home to Nords, it should be pretty friendly to non-elves and non-beast races. I doubt I'm going to give any other village more than this. Seydanin is a small fishing village in the southern Bitter Coast region, bordering the Ascadian Isles. Nice and far from the dangers of the ashlands of Molag Amur, so that worked for me. House Hlalu technically governs Seydanin, but the Imperial Legion guards the seaport and the town. It doesn't have a large population, but it is a common stop for Imperial travelers going to and from Vvardenfell. Most visitors are processed through the Census and Excise Office, part of the Empire's Coast Guard station at the harbor. Despite having a harbor, no boats offer travel, which is a bit weird. However, it does have a silt strider as an option, traveling to Balmora, Gnisis, Suran, and Vivek. Very good destinations, though it does mean you have to get in a silt strider. Yuck. You may be able to get a job with the Census and Excise Office since the local taxman was recently murdered. Though, the local taxman was just recently murdered, so maybe not. Ariel's trade house is the only place to trade in town, headed by the eponymous Ariel, a high elf. He does have a good selection of items though. Clothing, food, drinks, a Lives of the Saints book, and household items. So far, Seydanin is the second village to be qualified for a score on account of having both food and drinks for sale. I'll give it a 4 out of 10. It's tiny, there's not a lot of opportunities for jobs, and you'd likely end up living in one of the poor shacks. But Ariel does have a good amount of things for sale considering this is a village, so as long as you can find a source of income, you'd be quite well stocked. You could try to join the smugglers in Adamasartus to make money, though it seems particularly risky considering the Imperial guards in the village. While Seydanin is a great starter town for the Nerevarine, it's not so great as a starting or permanent home for a regular person, unless you have some connections or special knowledge that could get you employed in or near the village. Finally, Voss is an ancient farming village on the eastern coast. There's a small tribunal chapel, the harbor lies downhill from the village, the large and friendly Varro trade house is near the wharves, and is a nice place for travelers seeking accommodation. The houses in Voss have a strange architecture, a blend of Telvanni mushroom and stone. It has boat travel to Sadrith-Mora, Tel Arun, and Telmora, pretty decent options for goods and entertainment. There are not many traders in town though, so it's going to be pretty much necessary for you to travel somewhere else to get more than the bare necessities. Burkanius Varro is the Imperial who runs the Varro trade house with his Dunmer wife Ferris. He sells food and drinks and offers beds for rent to all visitors. Eldrilu Dalen is a Dunmer priestess who works at the Voss chapel. She sells religious books, some food and drinks. Since the chapel is so small, I'm unsure whether you could try to join the Tribunal Temple and get assigned to it. There's already 2 people here, Eldrilu Dalen and Yakin Bale, who is a healer and trainer in mysticism and alteration. Not sure where you could stay long term, perhaps one of the farmhouses. and job prospects also seem slim other than working on a farm or perhaps catching a lucky break and becoming a worker or a servant at the trade house or in a nearby wizard tower, Telvos. Most people here are farmers though, so that's the most likely job on offer. I'll give Voss a 2 out of 10. While it's livable, I wouldn't recommend a farming village for anyone other than someone who aspires to be a farmer. There's really only the bare necessities here, not even clothes. With that underwhelming village, we reach the end of my scoring of all the livable settlements in Vvardenfell. So based on my scores, here are my top 5. In first place, surprising me considering my hatred for the entire city in the game, Vivec with an unrivaled 9 out of 10. To be fair, this score only applies to the Foreign Quarter and possibly St. Dylan's if you join the Tribunal Temple. But the Foreign Quarter does have such a good amount of goods and services and is actually welcoming to Outlanders, so I can't imagine any of the other places are better unless maybe you're a member of the Imperial Cult or the Imperial Legion and can score a spot in one of the nicer forts. Tied for second place, Balmora and Tel Mora with an 8 out of 10. Technically, I wouldn't be able to live in Tel Mora due to the whole women-only thing, so Balmora would be the place I'd go, and if I'm honest, I think I prefer the city vibe of Balmora anyway, even if it's less peaceful than Tel Mora. I will also say that out of all these settlements, I think the houses in Balmora look quite alright, and I would enjoy renting or owning one. They're not pretty by any stretch of the imagination, but they're certainly far worse in Vvardenfell. In third, Molag Mar with a score of 7 out of 10. This is a slightly shittier version of a canton from Vivec, and it's positioned less favorably in terms of both trade and safety. Since it doesn't have all the other advantages of Vivec, I would prefer Balmora over it, but it's still a very solid place to live due to having plenty of goods and services. In fourth place, Ebonheart also with a score of 7 out of 10, but I wouldn't say it's exactly a tie between it and Molag Mar. While Ebonheart is an imperial town, so it's safer, and it's also super close to Vivec and gets trade from the mainland and other regions, the town itself doesn't have much going for it. If you want to buy things or find some entertainment, you'd have to constantly travel to Vivec for that, which is pretty annoying, so it bumps it down to fourth. Finally, in fifth place, I'm choosing Tel Branora as my final pick over Dagon Fell, mainly because Dagon Fell is smaller and also has the potential necromancer problem. An eccentric old lady living in the wizard tower doesn't bother me much, since I wouldn't get in her way with anything, and while the mushroom towers may stink when it rains, they're just so pretty, so I had to include one Telvanni settlement in my top 5. I think Tel Branora is far more likely to be somewhat friendly to an Outlander compared to Sadrith Mora, where Outlanders are officially not permitted to go past the Gateway Inn. And if you're curious, I also asked my partner to give me her top picks. She chose Vivec in first place, explaining that there's a lot of goods and amenities, access to craftsmen guild halls to potentially join a union and get fair wages. It's one of the main points of trade, and the weather is also good since you're far from Red Mountain. Ebonheart was our second choice since it's super close to Vivec, so you can easily take a boat or walk there for more amenities and work opportunities. It also has good vibes since it's an imperial town. Less likely to be hate crimed there was what she said about the safety of Ebonheart. Molag Mar was her third pick, bumped above Balmora because of more imports. Food especially was a concern. It would take longer to get to Balmora, and as someone who comes from our current world and has particular tastes especially in food, it would probably be strange and unpleasant to eat stuff like kwama eggs and hackalow leaf. So being in the south where lots of food from outside Morrowind comes in is a good idea. As a final pick, she mentioned Balmora as an option since it's in a fairly safe position, has a bunch of traders and services, the river is nice, and while the town isn't amazing or anything, it certainly beats a lot of the other ones. This has been my ranking of all the settlements on Vvardenfell by how nice they are to live in for a regular person if Tamriel was real. I'm very curious to hear about your top places and especially why you'd choose to live there. In any case, if you're looking forward to more videos about games I like, do remember to subscribe and leave a like and comment where you're at it too. They really help. This has been Beat Your Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.